I love the early mornings at work. I think I enjoy the serenity of the atmosphere. I water the potted plants by the window and crack open the slightly ajar window to let in some fresh air. Since I started working at this company, this routine hasn't changed. My name is Tom, and I'm 30 years old. I work in sales for a major general trading company. My sales performance is consistently the lowest month after month. My superiors and colleagues don't think highly of me, believing I lack motivation. In reality, I'm not interested in work or climbing the corporate ladder. When I accompany colleagues on sales calls, I'm more of a hindrance, so my main task has become taking care of the little errands for my colleagues who are out doing sales. Work moderately, live moderately, and live quietly without drawing attention are my mottos. However, someone came this year in the transfers who seemed determined to shake up my quiet life. "You are early again today, Tommy," with that cheerful greeting. Her slender arms wrap around my neck. I felt the warmth of her body against my back. "Good morning, Jessica. You're energetic early in the morning." I unwrapped her arms from around my neck without making it seem too harsh. Her name is Jessica. She's our supervisor who transferred here this spring. Having spent time abroad, she speaks 3 languages fluently and is 4 years older than me, a true talent. She's always cheerful, and her straightforward personality makes her popular among both men and women. She's also perfect as a superior, and those who initially complained about having a female boss surrendered within a week of her appointment. Or, "Why so cold? There's no one else here." Jessica pouted after I pushed her arms away. For some reason, she's taken a liking to me. I'm just a regular office worker who doesn't excel at his job. She, on the other hand, is a go-getter and a real career woman. I have no idea why she's so fixated on someone like me. "It's not about that, Jessica. You're a bit too touchy-feely for my liking." I've recently become more assertive in voicing this. In the beginning, I was just bewildered and didn't know how to react. At first, you'd blush and it was so cute, but lately, you've gotten a bit cheeky. Jessica took a seat next to my desk, leaning back in the chair to its fullest extent. I could hear the sound of her spine cracking. She probably worked late into the night yesterday. She's usually the first one to come in after me. And she's probably the last one to leave in our department. "You know I have to spell things out for you, right?" I said with a sigh. "Speaking your mind is fine, but treating me unfairly, that's not cool," she retorted, puffing out her cheeks, and she gave a little kick to the chair I was sitting in. Her gesture reminded me of a sulking child. It's a side of her completely different from her professional demeanor. Honestly, I can't wrap my head around why such a talented and beautiful woman, 4 years my senior, is so aggressively pursuing me. The entire department has come to recognize and accept this dynamic between Jessica and me. I find this situation deeply concerning. I constantly worry that being around a guy like me, who lacks motivation, might tarnish her reputation. Yesterday, I even found myself making a wish at the local chapel, hoping to get back my peaceful days. Anyway, no excessive PDA. I told her in as cold a voice as I could muster, and a disgruntled "all right" came in response. Truth be told, it's not unpleasant having a beauty like her make advances. However, the drawbacks are significant. I get jealous comments from male colleagues, and recently, from a junior Emily. Time and time again, I stress that I just want to lead a peaceful, inconspicuous life. While sneaking a glance at the back of Jessica, who was stylishly dressed in a slim-fitting pantsuit, I sighed again. Watching her, always so cheerful after having spent time abroad as a child, reminds me of a past I'd rather forget. I think only the HR folks at work know this, but I'm actually a returnee from overseas. I spent my childhood constantly moving from one foreign country to another because of my dad's job. I didn't come back to the US until I was 15. Being right smack in the middle of my teenage years probably didn't help. Having lived in multiple countries, I was a social butterfly. I thought, I'll fit right into an American high school in no time. But reality wasn't so straightforward. I made friends quickly, and at first, I think my life in the US was smooth sailing. The one person who brought my high school life crashing down was a single girl. Hell began when I was in 11th grade, and she ended up in my class. For whatever reason, she had it out for me. Stuff like, he's flaunting that he lived abroad, or he's too cocky and flashy, or he just doesn't get it. Being the queen bee at the top of the school hierarchy, she probably thought she could get her way with everything. The moment she spoke against me, my life changed. No one would talk to me or even make eye contact. Everyone was scared stiff of her. Then, I realized, if I tried to talk to my close friends, they'd get a hard time too. From that moment, I became invisible. It lasted until graduation. I declared to my dad that I would never attend a college in the US around that time. True to my word, I left for the UK right after high school graduation. Later on, I got into University of Oxford. I only came back to the US because my mom wanted me to. My mom, who was in poor health, I think was feeling a bit vulnerable. I wasn't mature enough to refuse such a request from her. Remembering my high school days, I made a promise to myself on the day I started my job to always stay under the radar. A presence that disrupts my peaceful days. What should I do about Jessica? A thorn in my side. Then, one day, an even bigger problem stood before me. It was a scorcher of a day, and my colleagues, who had been outside on assignments, were shutting down cold water as soon as they returned to the office. I was in charge of odd jogs, so I prepared drinks for them, chilled wet towels, and did everything I could to support. I always made sure never to take center stage in my duties. Tom, a customer specifically asked for you. My junior, Emily, approached me with a puzzled look on her face. It made sense. Nobody had ever specifically asked to speak to me for a business discussion before. Emily seemed a bit worried as she whispered to me in a voice others couldn't hear, "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure, but I'll meet with them anyway." Trying to reassure her, I lightly pat little Emily's shoulder. Yet she seemed to remain concerned and followed behind me. It looked like she intended to join me. I felt like a failure of a senior to have my junior this worried about me. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Excuse me," before knocking. A young woman's voice from the reception room responded, "Please come in." At that moment, cold sweat ran down my back, and I felt a slight dizziness. I instinctively wanted to run away. Not understanding why, the moment I bravely opened the door, I was frozen on the spot. "How many years has it been? You didn't even attend graduation. I was worried if you were even alive." Bright red lips uttered those words. Despite her flashy makeup, it suited her queenly demeanor perfectly. Lucy, why? Lounging on the reception room's sofa was the very person who had brought about my downfall, Lucy. She was the last person I ever wanted to see. I probably looked quite shaken. From behind, Emily asked again, "Are you okay?" I responded with "I'm fine" and took a seat across from Lucy, saying, "Excuse me. When I saw you in the hallway earlier, I didn't think it was really you. I mean, who could have imagined back then that you'd be working for such a prestigious company?" Her condescending and arrogant tone unchanged from our school days. She looked at me with a mocking upward glance and smirked. She seemed like a predator that had just spotted its prey, making my heart feel like it was going to jump out of my chest. Though I felt the need to say something, My mouth was dry and no words would come out. Lucy enjoyed my distress, grinning broadly. I tried to remind myself, I'm not that high school kid anymore. Excuse me, did my subordinate do something rude? I hadn't even noticed when Jessica entered the room, so hearing her voice nearly made me jump out of my skin. Who are you? Lucy asked with a frown, glaring at the sudden appearance. It seemed like she was annoyed, thinking her fun had been interrupted. I'm Jessica, Tom's supervisor. Tom rarely handles business meetings, so I hope he wasn't rude to you. Her face was smiling politely, but her eyes weren't. It felt like sparks were flying between Lucy and Jessica. After a tense moment, it was Lucy who broke first. Fine, I'll let it slide this time. Our companies have had a long-standing relationship since my father's time. Let's keep it that way. Lucy said, standing up and exiting the reception room with the click-clack of her heels. Quickly, Emily went to see Lucy out. The sound of the door slamming shut was the cue that allowed me to finally relax. Considering my unusual reaction, there would likely be questions from Jessica. The sinking feeling of having to explain my past to her weighed me down. Apparently, she's undergoing CEO training. She may come around again, but you don't have to deal with her, Tom. Let's have Emily grow into the role instead, Jessica said with a reassuring pat on my shoulder. Feeling the warmth of her hand, I was on the verge of tears. In the end, Jessica never asked me the reason I was upset that day, and we finished our day's work. I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under me. At the meeting the next day, it was decided that Emily would handle Lucy's account. I was designated as her assistant. I briefly explained to Emily that Lucy and I were high school classmates. From the previous day's events, Emily seemed to have picked up on my reluctance to deal with Lucy. I'm truly grateful for Emily's hard work. She tried her best to cater to Lucy's needs so I wouldn't have to face her. If there was any mistake, as her senior, I'd have to represent the company in front of Lucy. Emily carefully continued the dealings with Lucy's firm. Initially, Lucy demanded me, but when she realized her requests were being denied, she began other tactics to annoy us. She started bringing non-native English speakers to business meetings. Sometimes just acquaintances, and at times, introduced as co-owners. Emily could handle Spanish, French, and Chinese. But occasionally, Lucy would bring along someone who spoke Italian, Portuguese, or Japanese, which Emily couldn't handle. In such cases, Jessica quickly stepped in to support Emily. I felt guilty watching this, knowing I couldn't help. I felt bad burdening my junior, Emily, and worrying Jessica. I kept thinking I was a failure as a professional. One day, our always cheerful Jessica was out sick with a fever. It's rare for her to call in sick, so everyone was concerned. According to Emily, she was overworked and sleep-deprived, leading to a weakened immune system, and she caught a cold. Though it was an unfortunate situation, I hoped she'd take a good rest. If Jessica isn't here to help and Lucy brings someone I can't communicate with. Emily gazed anxiously at the words Jessica absent written on the whiteboard. And her fears became a reality. While I, who rarely goes out for client visits, was out assisting a colleague, Lucy suddenly arrived with a troublesome matter. When I returned to the office, I could hear Lucy berating Emily throughout the floor. Rushing into the room, Emily was flustered, being yelled at by Lucy. It seemed that today's negotiation required Italian, Emily's weakness. You do realize this is a trading company, right? How do you work here not knowing Italian? Or are you just looking down on us? Yelling at Emily, without a second thought, Lucy's face didn't show a hint of anger. She was grinning with a nasty smile, seemingly enjoying the situation to the fullest. It looked as if she had found her prey. Your usual helpful supervisor isn't here today. I heard she's feeling under the weather. Can't even take care of her own health. That's so third-rate." Beside the sarcastic Lucy, a young Italian who didn't seem to understand what was going on, was nervously watching Emily and Lucy. He was probably dragged here against his will by Lucy. "Well, speak up. Can't do business with someone I introduce you to, or are you going to apologize, explaining I don't understand?" With Emily's head lowered, Lucy continued to tap her on the back of the head rhythmically with a rolled-up document. Emily's back visibly shivered. Colleagues also observed the situation from a distance, running around searching for someone in the other departments who could speak Italian. Meanwhile, Lucy's attitude kept escalating. "Can't even explain. Come here right now." Saying this, she forcefully pulled Emily off the couch. The moment I saw that, something snapped inside me. "Is there an issue here?" I quickly brushed off the hand Lucy had on Emily's shoulder and shielded her behind me. "Oh, Tom, long time no see. Are you here to play in her place?" Lucy, finding a new target, had a cruel glint in her eyes. Ignoring her completely, I addressed to the flustered young Italian man. "Are you interested in doing business with our company?" Of course, I wasn't speaking in English. Italian flowed naturally from my lips. The young man seemed relieved to finally hear his native language. On the other hand, Lucy was stunned, staring at me in disbelief. The young man excitedly began explaining the plan he had in mind to me. Looking at me engaged in the conversation, Emily seemed genuinely surprised. All this time, she thought I was just some guy who did menial tasks by the window, but suddenly I was speaking Italian fluently and handling the negotiation. Can't blame her for being taken aback. During the negotiation, Lucy seemed to be glaring at me resentfully. In the end, the young man and I shook hands, laughed about the potential for a big deal, and wrapped up our discussion. Emily escorted the young man to the front door, as he wanted to report the outcome to his boss right away. Back in the reception room, Lucy and I couldn't tear our eyes away from each other, locked in a stare down. "Nothing's changed with you, huh? Still haven't grown up." I was the first to speak. The Lucy, who I once found intimidating, didn't scare me at all today. Perhaps successfully navigating that tough negotiation boosted my confidence. "Excuse me, what are you trying to say?" Lucy, seemingly caught off guard by my comment, retorted in a flustered manner. She still carried her usual high and mighty, queen bee attitude, but I could sense a hint of panic and fear. "What I'm saying is that you're acting childish, still pulling the same stunts as you did in high school without considering your age." Once I started, I couldn't hold back. Words I'd been holding in for so long came pouring out. "Oh, so you always have someone by your side because you haven't improved your Spanish at all. Must be tough babysitting an inept heiress like you. Don't you realize you're a burden?" I'd figured out pretty early on that Lucy wasn't proficient in Spanish. She probably can't speak Chinese either. Being the daughter of a trading company's CEO, Lucy likely had the stamp of failure pressed upon her. Acting tough probably masked her insecurities. I realize this now, maybe because I've grown up. "What do you know?" She hurled the papers she was holding at me, her voice shaking with anger. Her clenched fist trembled. "Just because you can effortlessly speak other languages, you think you're so great. Give me a break." Lucy's yelling sounded more like a desperate scream to me. Looking back to high school, I realized that the reason Lucy treated me so poorly was probably all due to her own insecurities. I only found out that her father was the CEO of a trading company after graduating from high school. I vaguely recalled that Lucy struggled greatly with her Spanish classes back then. But that's no excuse for the way she treated me. Deal with your own issues yourself. You're a grown-up after all. My words made Lucy's face turn beet red. She must have felt embarrassed being called out like that. She grabbed her bag from the couch and stormed out of the reception room. the sound of her heels echoing on the floor. I thought maybe I was a bit too harsh, but I didn't have the luxury of choosing my words carefully, and it's not like I didn't have any grudges. I hope she forgives me for being a tad bit sharp. Why did you keep quiet about being able to speak? Are you still hiding something from me? Suddenly, I heard Jessica's voice from behind and instinctively turned around. There stood Jessica, looking pale. Her lips were of a turble color. She glared at me with an upward gaze. Jessica, you look terrible." "Of course I do. I'm still running a fever. Got called in despite that, but I'm glad I came. Got to see something interesting," she said as she gently took a seat next to me. Emily, who had just returned from seeing off some guests, saw Jessica and asked with concern, "Are you okay?" "Don't worry about me. I'm fine. Everyone, get back to your work," Jessica said and cleared the reception room. I braced myself for a reprimand. It's like I was neglecting my duty by claiming I couldn't do what I was supposed to do. I figured I'd have no right to complain even if I got fired for negligence. "You're such a lying prince." Those unexpected words came out of Jessica's mouth. I was dumbfounded and could only utter, "What? Don't you remember me? That's cruel." I looked closely at Jessica's face. She must be feverish. Her face was pale, only the area around her eyes was slightly red. It looked like she had been crying. Suddenly, memories flooded back. "Oh, we've met before, right?" I was certain now. The girl with swollen red eyes, crying in a corner of a park in a foreign country, Europe. That image overlaid with Jessica before me. "Oh, in Germany." To my exclamation, she smiled warmly. "You finally remember. Since that day, you've been my prince on a white horse." When I approached the crying girl, she whispered in a tiny voice, "I don't understand." She was acting tough, saying she only needed to speak English and didn't need friends in a foreign land, but tears kept pouring from her big eyes. Being addressed in English must have comforted her. When I was still a young boy, I confidently told her, tears streaming down her face from trying to put on a brave front, a piece of advice my father once gave me. If you can speak multiple languages, the world becomes so much bigger for you. It's a waste to just confine yourself to a small world. Just try mustering up a little courage and strike up a conversation. I remember looking at her, clearly older than me, and proudly saying those words. Her tears stopped, and I felt relieved seeing that. I always wanted to meet the boy from that time again. I remembered his face and name. I thought you looked similar, but your personality seems so different now. I wondered if you really were my prince. Chuckling, Jessica remarked. The day after I met her, she told me she had gathered the courage to speak to a classmate at school. It was as if a spell had been cast, making the invisible barriers between them crumble instantly. Having parents with jobs that took them all around the world, she had been moving from place to place herself. Comparing our overseas stints, we realized there were times when we almost crossed paths, quite the close calls. I always thought we'd have a fateful reunion overseas, but to meet here of all places. It's hardly romantic, she pouted, looking somewhat childish. Truth be told, I often went back to that park, hoping to find the girl I had seen crying. But never finding her, I moved to the next country. After returning to the States, I was so caught up with my own life that I never thought of her. It's quite a curious connection we have. I wish I could have come up with something more eloquent, but that was all I could muster. Don't you think it's more like fate than just a curious connection? You get what I mean, right? Considering her perspective, she might be right. I always believed, with no real basis, that I could pull fate towards me. Impressive, right? She boasted, wrapping an arm around my shoulder. Leaning in close to my face, she gave a wide grin. You don't think you can escape, do you, Tommy? You're the one who expanded my world, so you have the responsibility to stay by my side in this vast world. Understand? Such a forceful approach was very like her. But I didn't mind it at all. With the world being so vast, I wonder how I got caught. Don't you think you're getting a little cheeky? The image of her laughing so hard she'd fall over in a wedding dress was a scene for a not-so-distant future. Running from her, who had strong-armed fate into granting this chance encounter, seemed impossible. I guess if this were a novel, it'd be a happy ending.